of our favorite cartoonists in the world, Erica Moen, tweeted a very nice thing the other day, or skeeted, I don't know what the hell they called, tweeted a very nice thing the other day about how a episode of ComicLab was really helpful to her in a specific moment of her life, right? And I was like, oh God, that's lovely. And she tweeted the episode. And so I was like, you know what? It's been 5 or 6 years since this episode. I'm going to have a listen. It'd just be fun to, it would be like carte blanche to me. I don't remember what I said 5 years ago, so let's see what the episode was. And I have to tell you, Brad, in listening to it, it was an episode from 5.5 years ago. Only 5.5 years ago. We sounded so much younger, Brad. There was such a youthful twang in both of our vocal cords. Like, you were like, well, I'll tell you what a great, beautiful day it is. Oh, Brad Guigar. And then I come skipping in off the field. Hi, I'm Dave Kellett. I'm so young and happy. And it was only 5.5 years ago, Brad. What the hell?
What happened? What happened in those 5 years that brought us down so much?
I guess a global pandemic, but I don't know. I was unprepared, and maybe no one else could hear it aside from you and I with our own voices. I was unprepared for how much higher pitch and lilted our voices were 5 years ago.
Well, I mean, I guess it comes with the territory. I always say it's hard to get worse at something you do every day. We've been podcasting, two shows a week we're in our 7th year now. And that's got to have a certain effect on how we vocalize. I've noticed this to myself if I'm talking to like a neighbor on the street or just talking, out in the real world. My voice, if I'm telling a story or if I've got something I want to convey, I slip into podcast mode and I start talking different. I start enunciating. I start emphasizing different. In fact, you can see we're both on screens. I start waving my hands like I do because I realized like if I actually go full body, I sound better, right?
Yes.
And it must be just bizarre to talk to me out on the street in Philadelphia because you're just like, hey, Brad, how's it going? And all of a sudden I'm jumping up and down and waving my arms and putting dramatic pauses in and emphasizing. And there's a reason they don't let me out of a house is what I'm trying to say.
Well, you know that old saying that, you can hear a smile, that if someone's talking, and if I'm talking right now, but if I talk with a smile, you a little bit hear the difference in my voice, right? And so I think you might be right that maybe in podcasting we have picked up a certain sonorousness that we did not have previous.
I think so.
But it's weird. You should go back and listen to that episode that Erica tweeted and just have a listen to your voice and see if you think or have the same reaction that I did, which was, holy hell, is this man right out of the womb? He sounded so young. And
listen to this fetus with the microphone.
Yeah, I was genuinely taken aback by how different your voice sounded.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I'll see if I can put the notes for that in the show notes. I'll see if I can put a link to that.
That's great. Yeah. So if you're on patreon.com/ComicLab, you can go ahead and check out that old episode and see if I am right. See if we sound like two young whispering lads skipping through a field. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show where two older, wiser, and more sonorous podcasters talk about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, the author. And you know what? We haven't gotten better at talking at all.
Also the author. I always liked Emmett Otter, one of Jim Henson's better creations.
The author of Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist at Drive in Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. I'm excited to fire up the mic and talk with you because we have two big topics for this week's show. The second of which will be my breakdown of my most recent Kickstarter, because I really wanted to give people brass tacks numbers and actionable advice on what they can do for their Kickstarter. And I think actually giving very specific data will be helpful for that. So that'll be part 2 of the show. But Brad, what do we got for part 1 of the show?
Well, part 1, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, autobiocomics. But just before we go to that, I wanted to put a little bumper on that cold open. Erica was responding to a little conversation starter that I've done on Bluesky every few months. And it's very simple. And it's tell me the most memorable interaction you've ever had with a comic creator.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I always do this because it's fascinating to hear the stories. And almost all the stories have the same thread to them. It's never a big, amazing moment. It's never Burke Breathed stepped on stage and gave a keynote address of the 10 reasons that Brad Guigar is an amazing cartoonist. It's never something like that. It's usually something like Stan Sakai walked by and picked up my comic and told me how good he thought it was. Or I was sitting next to somebody in an airport. We were shooting the breeze. And later on, I found it was Kurt Busiek. Right. It's never something big. It's always something kind of small and kind and quiet.
Right.
And it's just a good reminder to everybody, all of us, when we're at a personal appearance or a comic convention or at like an NCS event or something like that, that it's never the big events. It takes so little. It takes very, very small acts of kindness to create a joy in somebody that they're going to carry for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, boy, do I agree with that. But Phil Folio said something to you and I a long time ago, which was when you make an appearance at a book signing or a Comic-Con, if your feet hurt, if your back hurts, if you're not selling the way you were hoping to sell, but someone comes up to your booth, I think the phrase he used was, you better fart butterflies, because they will remember that moment. They might have traveled 3 hours, 3 days to get to that Comic-Con, and they're so excited to see you in that moment. Right. And so give them joy. But in general, Brad, you're right that it's those small moments that people remember. That's what I remember from cartoonists that we have interacted with in the past. And it's very much like Gandalf. It's those small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep that darkness at bay, Brad. And so honestly, I hold on to those small everyday deeds that I've from heroes and peers that I've met that meant a lot to me, you know?
And if you're listening to this show and you're like, oh, that's great, but I'm not Stan Sakai. That's wonderful, but I'm not Dave Kellett. The thing I want you to remember is that, and here's another thing, that if you go back to that thread and read all those comments, nobody is nobody. Everybody is somebody to somebody.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you may not think that you're a big famous somebody, but you're somebody to somebody. And these things that you do, even if you don't think it matters, you're talking to somebody that later on is going to pop up. And Dave and I have had this happen. Very thankfully have had it happen dozens of times. Come up and say, oh, I remember coming up to your table 10 years ago. And you said XYZ. And I still remember that. It made such a big difference in my life. Yeah. And it's something that you
and I don't remember it. We have no memory of it at all. But exactly. And I will say this, and I've said that, I haven't said this on the show in a while, but if you are at a booth and you have young, wide-eyed kids who love comics come up to your booth, you have a GD responsibility to make that kid feel special, to give them a good sketch, to set them on their way with optimism and hope about cartooning. You are representing cartooning at that point. And by God, be a good person and make that kid feel great about cartooning, their own cartooning, and their future in cartooning. That is your job in that moment. And I know that I sound like a grumpy old dad when I say that, but that honestly is one of the few times where you really have to up your game. If you're having a bad Comic-Con, you up your game when a kid comes up to your booth.
You smile a little bit bigger. Yeah. Well, Dave, speaking of smiling, we've got a question from a Patreon backer that made us smile, and it comes in to us through patreon.com/ComicLab. This is a little long, but I didn't feel like I could edit it too much. So bear with me here.
Okay.
It goes like this. I've been working on a particular story for many years, still in the writing process. The project is based on real stories from my life, around which I built what I hoped was a compelling world. I set the script aside for a while and came back to it, only to find myself second-guessing building a wholly fictional world for my stories, wondering if instead I should rewrite it as autobiographical, or at least semi-autobiographical. I mean, the core stories are good, but the rest of my surrounding life was kind of mundane. If I do make it all about me, I might have to add some fiction to keep the story interesting. Is there a clear point a story shifts from autobio to semi-autobio to based upon to inspired by? If I need to fictionalize some of it, should I stick with the current story, which I think is good, and stop making it all about me? Or am I shortchanging myself? And how interesting a few honest and fully autobio years from my life might actually be if they contain several of my best personal stories. To add, I don't want to lose the point that the stories are mine, and I got a little annoyed at past me for giving them to other people, even though they're my characters. So here's the question, Dave. We've got a person that has been writing a comic for years and is stuck with where to draw the line between fiction and fact.
Right.
Should this be an autobio, semi-autobio, based upon, inspired by? And if so, what's the difference between the two? Where do you draw the line? How do you draw the line? What kind of advice do we give this poor guy so he can start working on his comic?
So I will dive into my thoughts on this, but I first have to give the big caveat because I think it's worth mentioning that you have asked this question to two people, or maybe I shouldn't throw Brad under the bus on this, to at least to me, who is not a longstanding fan of autobio comics because they are most commonly boring and kind of sad sack stories about like, well, I made some toast today. No, looks like it got burnt. I'm Ziggy. And I am the type of reader that wants to reach through both movies, film, television, radio plays, comics, short stories. When a character is sad sack, I want to throw them out a window and say, get your shit together. Yeah. And it drives me nuts. And I don't know whether that's just my personality. I tend to think of myself as an optimist, as a nice people person. But when I read a sad sack story, and a lot of autobio comics are, I want to throw them out of a window. And so I tend to not be a fan of autobio comics, or more broadly, semi-autobio comics. But having said that, I want to answer the question because to me, I think the core answer here is that Mark Twain quote of never let the truth get in the way of good fiction. You know what I mean? Yeah. What? That's not actually the quote. What was the actual quote?
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Or a good story. There we go. Thank you. And it's true because if you are sort of biblically accurate to your life story, it could be boring as spit. And your core responsibility as a storyteller is not to be accurate to your life. The core responsibility as a storyteller is to bring entertainment and some shade of meaning to the story, right?
Yeah.
And so if you need to give up facts for the benefit of fiction, then give up facts for the benefit of fiction because your life will always have its own truth. This story needs to have its own unique truth in order to be compelling and in order to carry meaning. What are your thoughts, first blush thoughts, Brad? Oh. First of all, am I wrong in throwing you under the bus as well and saying that you are not a fan of autobio, or are you more of a fan than I am?
Well, I don't I'll put it this way. I don't read a whole lot of autobio comics.
When was the last autobio comic you might have read, do you think?
Oh God, I don't know that I would want to name one particularly because I would probably end up saying something kind of sour about it. But what I want to say is that I've got really strong opinions on autobio comics because I've got firsthand experience with autobio comics in that Fables that I was nominated for an Eisner, no big deal, was Fables was an autobio/bio comic. In other words, I would take my own stories from my personal life and I would do them into a Fables comic. Or sometimes readers of the Philadelphia Daily News would send me their stories, and I would take their stories and make them into comics.
But you would take liberties for the benefit of the story, right?
Not liberties. So this is what I want to really get into here. I wouldn't change the story. I wouldn't take liberties with the story. I'll give you a great example. Person said, I've got a great story for you. I looked out the window one day. I had just planted a sapling tree. I just planted a tree out in front of my row house. And I caught my neighbors pouring bleach on the roots of that tree. And of course, the tree died. And this tree that I had spent money on planting out in front of the house, dead. And can you believe that happened? That was the story. Now, that story has no meaning. That story has kind of like, oh, it's surprising that the neighbor poured bleach on the roots.
But it's sort of just the random cruelty of humanity at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I did was I started asking around. I started talking to some people from Philadelphia, talked to some of my neighbors. And I said, because I was at that point very new to the neighborhood, I said, hey, I got this story. What do you make of it? And I had one neighbor said, oh, I know exactly why they did that. Same reason that you're going to want to do it one of these days. I said, why is that? She said, I just spent $20,000 for plumbing and excavating because one of those trees, very similar to the one you're talking about, had grown up and its roots had dug into my sewer line. And I had to pay $20,000 to have a new sewer line put in because of all the problems. And so there's certain types of trees that you can plant in a neighborhood like this. There's certain types you can't.
Yes.
And there's old timers that don't want any trees. In fact, that's kind of the reason that the subtitle of the Fables collection was Who Needs Trees When You Got Green Awnings? that was the feeling. I got green awnings on my house. I don't need a tree. And so then I wrote that story and I gave it
structure, then you have meaning, then you have, yeah, exactly.
Context. I gave it meaning. Here's this thing that happened. And here's, like why it might have happened. And here's the bigger story. That was a really, really great page. That was a great comic because it was this thing. It started a conversation. Was this the right thing, the wrong thing? Oh my God, I had a $20,000 plumber bill too. If you're going to do an autobio comic, it's not enough to just say, here are the things that happened in my day. You've got to say, here are the things that happened in my day, and here's why it matters. Here's why you should care. Here's the context. Here's something about it. You just can't put your diary in there. You've got to make it mean something for people.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean changing the facts necessarily, but it does mean writing. It does mean entering that into that arena as not just someone who wrote down the things that happened. That's a list. Nobody likes reading a list. You've got to become a writer at some point. And to answer this person's question, where's the line drawn between autobiographical and semi-autobiographical and based upon and this, that? The answer is, and I'm going to say this with love in my heart, is who cares? Nobody cares.
Yeah.
All they care about is this an interesting story?
Right.
And if you're doing straight up autobiography or a documentary or something like that, or if you're doing journalism, then the facts are very important. If you're doing journalism, the facts are crucial, and you can't even necessarily contextualize that. You've just got to say this is what happened. All right.
Right. I would extend that to documentarian work as well. Yeah. A form of journalism. Yes.
But for the rest of it, once you go, give yourself the leeway to make your story interesting. And by the way, you goddamn better give yourself the leeway to make the story interesting, or else nobody's going to read it.
Yes.
Then I don't care about how much of that. No more than if somebody gives me a cookie. I don't sit there and I say, how many grams of sugar did you put in this cookie? No, I don't fucking care. I'm enjoying the cookie. I might ask about it later when my doctor's talking to me about sugar diabetes. But right now, all I know is,
oh, I love that pronunciation.
I got a cookie.
Yeah.
I don't care about how many grams of sugar. If it's 15 or 16, I don't care. All I care about is you gave me a good cookie. And that's your job as a cartoonist. Give your readers a good cookie.
Yes. I know I'm throwing out a lot of quotes today, but Thoreau had that quote that said, most men live lives of quiet desperation. Yeah. Right. And what did that mean? That meant that people live stifled lives where their true potential, their desires aren't met. It's unexciting. Right. And so the problem I have with a lot of autobiographical comics and a lot of autobiographical storytelling in general is that their stories are quietly desperate. You know what I mean? Because they don't invest it with enough meaning. They don't invest it with enough excitement. They don't put an authorial slant on it that takes the desperation and gives it meaning, gives it context, gives it a point, right?
Yeah.
And so I end up wanting to throw them out the window because I'm like, I don't want to live your life of quiet desperation. Yeah. I want this to have meaning and excitement and entertainment and value and a message, right? And so that's where the artistry often fails, is that they, having lived their life of quiet desperation, a lot of people then just translate that to the page, and it becomes these diary comics that you're like, I don't care, and also get your shit together. And so I know this makes me sound like such a grump, but you have to invest it with meaning, and you have to. So first, like Brad said, it has to be entertaining. It has to make them want to turn from page 3 to page 4, right? That's number one.
Right.
And then it has to bring meaning somehow. It has to have a message. It has to have a purpose for the reader's life. And that's the harder of the two. And so that's why Twain would say, like, if you have to inject it with a little bit of fiction to get them, A, to turn the page, and then B, to find meaning there, then inject some fiction in there. Because to Brad's point, no one cares if it's 100% accurate to your life. They would care if it was Thomas Jefferson. They'd be like, that didn't happen in Thomas Jefferson's life. They don't care.
And it's important.
Yeah, they don't care if it happened on a Monday or a Tuesday to a bus driver in Ohio. No one's going to research those facts. You know what I mean? They just want the story to have entertainment and have a meaning at the end of it. And so you've got to be really careful not to fall into the trap of making it so historically accurate that it is boring and it has no meaning.
Right. And before you misunderstand my friend over there, take a moment.
My grumpy friend.
No, I co-sign everything you said. But before you misunderstand, that does not mean when Dave's talking about stories of quiet desperation, that does not mean that your story has to be upbeat and positive and happy.
No,
and I'll give you a great example. There's a graphic novel called Blankets by Craig Thompson. And if you read that story, there's a lot of very dark, heavy things that happened in that story. That is an autobiography. Okay.
Right.
It's not, there's a lot of parts in it that's not very happy. But it's filled with meaning. It's filled with context. It's filled with a purpose. There's a reason that this story is being told. Okay. It's not just here's a list of the things that happened to me. Here's a list of the things that happened to me, and here's why it matters. That's what Craig delivers in Blankets. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an upbeat story. No. But it's got what Dave is saying is that it's got to have meaning.
Yes, and sometimes I get it, and I grant you that some stories are to their intention, their meaning, their context is to tell you that you're not alone for living X way, right? Like that. Look, let my autobiography tell you that you are not alone, right? We're living this life together. We've both suffered these indignities or these problems or these things. And so that in itself is a transmission of meaning. I get that, and I grant that. But it has to be more than just a recital of facts, as Brad said. It has to be more than just a diary entry of today I went to the store and then I had a cat and the cat was very nice and I petted the cat and then the cat left and then I went back to my house with the stuff that I bought at the store. And you're like, what's the meaning there? I don't care. Why did you waste my time? Because that's what it comes down to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, again with the quotes, but one of my favorite authors, Dostoevsky, he had this quote that said, the more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. And here is my problem as an optimist who loves my fellow human beings, is that very often I will hear the details of their life and it will infuriate me such that I like them less. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I love humanity broadly, but you give me the details of a person's life and I like them less. So if you're going to tell an autobiographical story, it has to have meaning and it has to be entertaining in the meantime. Because for me, as a reader, I know this is so subject specific and I don't want you to write for Dave Kellett, but it's instructive for what an autobiographical story needs. Is that it has to be entertaining and it has to have meaning. It has to have a larger context that it's tying into for the reader so that it benefits their life, right?
Yeah. Well, you're 100% right. You're 100% right. What we're advocating here, and the answer to the question is, do whichever one of those things, autobio, semi-autobio, right on through the list. do whichever one of those things you think you can do that delivers the best story. We don't care which one you choose one and run with it. And as far as trying to decide how much fiction and where the line is drawn and all that kind of stuff, the line is drawn wherever you draw it, and you draw the line at the place that gives you the best story. Now, at this point, as we're wrapping up this topic a little bit, we do have to give our friend a little tough love here, Dave, because I'm going to go back to the first sentence that was in that question. I've been working on a particular story for many years, and I'm still in the writing process. Now, this is a problem that we've got to address. We've talked about paralysis from analysis. We've talked about procrastination in that you can't make a mistake if you don't do anything yet.
Yes.
Right. And we're all guilty of that. We're guilty. I'm guilty. Dave's guilty.
I'm guilty of it.
We talked about it an episode ago with our taxes. We're guilty every February and March. Procrastination. But this is bordering on malignant procrastination.
Malignant.
And I'm saying malignant
like
for a reason.
What a great word is malignant. Sorry, keep going.
It's going to kill your ability to ever be a cartoonist. If you've been writing for years, that's a real problem. You need to do whatever it takes. And whether it means putting a deadline out there, June 1st, or whether it means, I don't know what it means for you. But you need to do something, pal. You need to start doing something, because all of this navel gazing is killing your aspirations of being a cartoonist.
Right.
When I saw years in that, I knew we had to answer the question, but we also had to say, get on with it. And I'll tell you why I use that strong language. I want to read this fucker's comic.
Yeah.
I want to read what he does. I want to read it. I want to see it. And it's not going to happen if he sits there trying to decide whether it should be based on or inspired by. Right? It doesn't matter. Do the comic. Come on, please. Draw a rectangle, put something in that rectangle, and let's get on with it. I want to read your comic.
The answer might be, and Brad and I have talked about this before, choose one segment of the story, one scene of the story, and do the 9-page scene. Just do that. Just do the 9-page scene, because in doing it, it will be instructive about whether you want it to be like, I don't feel right about being fully autobiographical. I wish this was a semi-fictional character. But do the 9 pages. The first 3 pages, the beginning. The middle 3 pages, the middle. The last 3 pages, the end. That's it.
Yes.
I don't want to make it any trickier than that. Give me 3 that are beginning pages, 3 that are middle pages, 3 that are the end of the story.
Yes.
And then that little segment, that little scene, A, will get you moving, and B, will be instructive onto which of these routes you want to take. Because in the doing, you will be like, oh, no, I don't feel good about this being a fictionalized character. It's got to be me. You'll know, you know? And so I've been throwing out a lot of quotes. I'm going to throw out my grandfather's quote: "Shit or get off the pot." You gotta do it. You gotta do it. You know.
Yes.
And so Brad's right. It is tough love, but when the word years gets thrown about, because I have a few projects that have the word years behind them in terms of planning and thinking about it. And like Brad said, I will throw myself under the bus.
Yeah.
It is a fear of failure that has kept me from starting them. Right. I can't be a failure if I haven't started yet. I haven't blown it yet because I didn't start it. And so the children's book that I want to do hasn't been started yet. The Western that I want to do hasn't been started yet. The other story that I've never mentioned on the show before hasn't been started yet because I can't fail at it if I don't start. And that, I think, is part of what's happening here with this paralysis from analysis, is you can't fail if you don't start. So just do a short 9-page story.
Anything. And don't get bogged down in what the character design should be. Because take a look at
because here's the next problem. You go like, all right, I will do a 9-page story. What pen should I use? Oh gosh, there's a variety of pen. Just start drawing. You know what I mean? Like Brad's right. You've got to just start. When the word years is in front of a thing, that's too long, you know?
Take a look at the characters from Evil Inc. from when I started that as a comic strip in 2005. and then take a look at the characters as they exist today. Completely different. The character designs have changed immensely. There's characters that I introduced last month that I'm drawing slightly different today.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Just because as you draw them, you're like, nah, you know what? I'm drawing this Minotaur. I like his horns a little bit broader. I'm going to adjust his chin a little bit. I'm doing this. I'm doing that.
Look at Opus the Penguin, first panel versus Outland at the end, or the end, even the end of Bloom County. Totally different, you know.
So don't get all don't get all wound up about character design or this. I think we're at the point where you draw a rectangle and you put somebody in it.
Yeah, I can't help but sigh at that because it's good advice for all of us, myself included, is that, I mean, I have a project, Brad, that I've gone so far as to like really noodle the logo design because you know what that means? That means I don't have to draw panel one. So I just keep noodling the logo design for this story that does not exist yet and might not exist yet until I get to GD work about it.
It goes into that thing that we've all done. By the way, the reason that you know, there's that old saying, every time I've got one finger pointed at you, I got three more pointed back at me. It's because we've all been there. How many times have I said, I can't get my taxes started until I straighten out that shelf? You can't do taxes with a sloppy shelf.
Gotta vacuum. I gotta do that.
Yeah, better go over there and do the dishes. I can't start writing the story until I do the dishes. Can't write on a sink full of dirty dishes. There's lots of different ways to play tricks with yourself and to procrastinate. And we're all familiar with them because we all do them. Yeah. But at some point, you really do. We wouldn't be your I don't want to say friends because out of what do you call that, a quasi social relationship on social. Yeah. But we wouldn't be giving good advice if we didn't start drawing.
Yes,
we wouldn't be giving you good advice if we saw you've been working on this for years and you're still trying to figure out these things that, let's face it, don't matter. I don't care.
It's a little bit rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic because you're like, blue or red, blue or red or blue, red. Red has a lot going for it. Blue is a bunch better. Just pick. You know, at some point you have to pick. And part of this is just making choices and putting things down on a page. And I will tell you, even decades into doing Drive, when did I start Drive? No, 15 years of doing Drive. Even after 15 years of doing Drive, I look back at a page that I did 3 weeks ago, Brad, and I go, I wish I hadn't made that choice. But I made a choice. I made a choice, and now it's done, and I move on to the next page, you know, and you will adjust, you will course correct, and in the doing, you will both come to find out which path you want to do. Autobiographical, semi-autobiographical, fictional, semi-fictional. And you will find out the pens you want to use, and you will find out the lettering style you want to use. But all of that requires that you start. And so when we see the word years in front of someone saying planning, we know what's happening, and it's paralysis from analysis, and you just got to start doing it. Hey, gang, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we'll tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Yeah, because when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And you'll get access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And ho Nelly, if you want even more comics goodness in your life, check out the new drawing show that we're doing with our pal Kevin McShane over at wrongwayshow.com. That's wrongwayshow.com.
In each episode, we'll show you how to draw your favorite cartoon characters the wrong way.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Oh, I can hear the music, and that means only one thing. It's time for, once again, a visit from Susan MacTaggart.
Oh, Bradley John, lovely to see you. Bradley John, lovely to see you. Bradley John, I brought these 2 tickets, you might notice. I brought these 2 tickets.
2 tickets to where?
To the gun show, sweetheart. I see you in that muscle shirt. My goodness, Bradley John, everything is working. Everything is working, Bradley John. So, Bradley John, let me ask you, who needs a little affirmation today, Bradley John? Who needs a little affirmation?
Today we're doing another personalized affirmation for one of our $10 Patreon backers.
Yes.
And that person this week is Chris Eliopoulos.
Chris Eliopoulos, lovely Christopher. Can I call you Christopher? Christopher, so special. So I want to tell you, and this is your affirmation, Christopher, for backing the Patreon, the ComicLab podcast on Patreon, and especially that little Hungarian goulash, Brad Guigar. Oh my goodness, Bradley John. Anyway, Christopher, I want to tell you, here's your affirmation, Christopher. Christopher, you have left everything on the field. You've left everything on the field. You did it. But unfortunately, sweetheart, it was an away game, and I need you to go back and pick up that stuff, okay?
Oh, no, not an away game.
Oh, Christopher, so all the best to you, all the love. I'm sending all the positive energy I can from Susan MacTaggart to you, Christopher. You're doing it. You have left everything on the field, but I do need you to go back, sweetheart, because it's an away game, and you can't leave that stuff on the field, okay? Well, Bradley John, I want to say to you, Bradley John, keep the sparkle in your eye and the swing in your step, because it is working, my friend. It's working.
I appreciate that, Susan. Once again, thank you so much for dropping by. Susan MacTaggart, everyone, with a personalized affirmation for one of our Patreon backers. And now, if I could get Dave to come back. Dave, can you wrestle
I'm putting the
microphone back from Susan?
I am putting the earphones back in, Bradley, yes.
Because I've been champing at the bit to get to this update for 4 weeks. And that's because it's time for you to share us some actual numbers from your recent Kickstarter. You had a Kickstarter for a fantastic book, Anatomy of Dogs, and you have agreed to not just talk about things in general terms. You've got actual numbers from your Kickstarter campaign that you're going to share with our audience.
Yes. And from those numbers and from the quote from the printer and anticipated Kickstarter fees and stuff, I can give you the gross profits, the net profits, and the 3 to 5 year profits from the continuing on sales. So let's jump right into what we're going to talk about today. So this was my most recent Kickstarter, Anatomy of Dogs. That if you wanted to look at it while we are talking about it, you can go to dogkickstarter.com. It's over. There are late pledges if you wanted to join, but it is over. So you can just have a look at what I did on the Kickstarter. We ended up unlocking 10, 11, 12 stretch goals, something like that. I don't remember what the final number was. Yeah. A lot of physical rewards in the book, and then a bunch of ebooks, including my 3 Eisner nominated books people could get for free with the Kickstarter. Yeah. But I want to get down to the brass tacks of it, because this Kickstarter ended up being something like 53,300 or 53,400. I don't have the number offhand here. I have it further down in my notes. 53,400. And this was, aside from my Drive and Stripped Kickstarters, which are north of 100,000, this was my most successful Sheldon Kickstarter ever. Wow. And I mention that to you because before we talk about anything, this was my first Kickstarter without Twitter, without Instagram, without Facebook, and no Substack. It was the most successful Sheldon Kickstarter I've ever had, and I only use Bluesky. And that's going to become a big part of this conversation, because let's jump right into the top 10 sources of backers for this Kickstarter. So if you've never launched a Kickstarter before, in the background of your Kickstarter, the dashboard, the administrative dashboard, you can see where people are coming from. And if you're smart, like Brad and I have been for the last 5, 6, 7 Kickstarters we've done, you put specific tracking codes to specific mentions in specific mediums. So when I mention on Bluesky, I only use one linking URL. When I mention on my blog, on my website, I only use one linking URL. When Brad mentioned it on his sources, he only used one URL. We'll get into that in a minute. So here are the top 10 sources for my most recent Kickstarter, and let's talk about the benefits and the drawbacks to each of them. So the number one source of my backers that I could track was from Kickstarter itself, emailing backers who have backed me before. And that's key, because it means that there is a knock-on effect to having more than one Kickstarter. We'll talk about that as we go on. But basically, Kickstarter, if I back a book from Brad, and a year goes by, and then he is kickstarting another book, Kickstarter will send me an email for the folks that have opted into that, saying, hey, Brad's kickstarting again. Would you like to jump in? And a lot of those people jump in right away. They are recurring customers, so to speak. So that's 18% of my final backer count was from that email to Kickstarter backers who have backed me before. So what does that tell us right away? Well, it tells us that as a platform, Kickstarter itself brings you people that you might not necessarily be able to bring to yourself.
Yep.
I might be able to reach those people through other sources. That's totally a fair assumption, given that they've backed me before. But the fact that 18% jumped in from an email from Kickstarter is a big deal. So that tells us that Kickstarter as a platform is still a worthwhile place to be backing, or to be launching your project-based social distributed platform. God, my let me try that again.
It's a great place to launch your crowdfunding.
Thank you. Jeez Louise, too much talking all at once. All right, now, here's where it gets fun. The second best single source of pledge sources for me on this Backstarter was my Patreon, not for Sheldon, but for Drive, which brought in 8% of my backers for this Kickstarter. So what does that tell me specifically? So that tells me that, first of all, the Patreon backers for Drive are more involved and more energetic. They're more, and that's partially for what I put into it. But also, I think that these are basically fans of both my bits of work, Sheldon and Drive, that have just decided they're going to pick one and back one. You know what I mean? So Drive was the second highest pledge source. The third highest pledge source, coming in at 6% of all my backers, was Bluesky. So let's put a big pause on the conversation right here and talk about how, Brad, Twitter, which had 10,000 followers on it, brought in 2 backers last time.
For your previous Kickstarter.
For my previous Kickstarter. Instagram, which had 40,000 people, brought in 1 or 2 people. I can't remember the exact number. 1 or 2 people the last time. Bluesky, which for me at the current moment of recording this only has 4,300 backers, brought in 6% of the backers for this Kickstarter project. That's a huge difference from what Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, for a lesser extent, could ever perform. And reminder, I did not use Twitter. I did not use Instagram. I did not use Facebook for this Kickstarter. This was entirely Bluesky. So for me, one of the big picture headlines for this news report is that Bluesky works. Yes. You can reach out, you can find your readers, and you can direct them to where you want them to go. So of these numbers, Brad, Bluesky, I believe that works out to roughly 1.06 of my backers on Bluesky ended up backing me on this Kickstarter.
That's right. Yeah. If you had 4,300 Bluesky followers and you got 46 pledges, that's 1.06%. We'll call that conversion rate.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
your conversion rate.
That's a great way to look at it.
For Bluesky.
Now, compare that to my 10,000 backers that used to be on Twitter. I'm no longer there.
Right.
And of that, 2 people jumped in. Brad, do you have the number for what that percentage is?
That's 0.02% conversion rate. So doing the math, in other words, you can easily say that's about 56 times higher. Bluesky is 56 times higher in conversion rate from 0.02 to 1.06, even though you had 10,000 backers on Twitter and only 4,300 backers, 4,300 on Bluesky, which goes back to the previous episode's conversations about how numbers are deceiving on social media. People are having a hard time leaving Twitter because they think, oh, I've got all this audience I built. Right. But the audience isn't there. There's no there. It's a number that is very much misleading until you do something like you did with the Kickstarter and actually put Twitter to the test. How many people did you deliver me? 0.02. By the way, when you mentioned 1 out of 40,000, the conversion rate for Instagram for your preceding Kickstarter is 0.00025%.
That's terrible.
Even less.
And yet, I want to say this out loud so that people hear that they're not alone. It was hard for me to leave Instagram. Yes. Because it felt like leaving money on the table. It was not true. Those 40,000 people, I could not actualize them into supporting me either on Kickstarter or Patreon or at Comic Cons, the like. 40,000 people felt like a lot. And that's how Instagram fools you. It feels like a lot. Like this is a big, important number, right, Brad? It feels important.
Yes, it does.
It's not important. I'll tell you what's more important. Those 4,000 people on Bluesky that I could activate 1% of, which turned out to be the third biggest source for my Kickstarter, right?
Yes.
And so this is where you have to say, okay, what's actually working? What is the utility of me being on Twitter? What is the utility of me being on Instagram? And I think if you are honest with yourself and look at the hard brass tack numbers, not the fake number that Instagram or Twitter is going to present you with of like, oh, Dave Kellett, you've got 40,000 followers. This is important. Right. Didn't mean shit to me. It meant one backer on Kickstarter, 3 backers on Kickstarter, 2 backers on Kickstarter. And so Bluesky is the answer, I think, Brad. It is the answer for what we've been looking for. And to Brad's point about Substack, as I look towards that, maybe Substack is the answer.
Yeah.
You need to be able to convert those readers into backers, either on Kickstarter or on your Shopify store or on Patreon or at Comic-Cons, or else they are largely useless to you. Those numbers are fake numbers, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if they're bot accounts. It doesn't matter if they're zombie accounts. It doesn't matter if they're propaganda accounts. If you can't actually convert a percentage of those people to actually backing you, you were wasting your time on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook. You have to be able to convert them.
Yeah. And think about the amount of time that's put back into your studio time by not having to post on multiple social media platforms. You're not posting on Facebook. You're not posting on Twitter. You're not posting on Instagram. And by the way, I know there are some people who just have like an automated one thing goes out to all of those. But that's super ineffective because there's a certain way to post on Instagram. There's a certain way to post, and there's no one size fits all. If you're going to do this, you've got to have that formatted for the social media network that you're on. Yep. So I would imagine this was you curtailed all activity on Facebook years and years ago, but you curtailed your activity on Twitter and Instagram just at the end of 2024, about the same time that I did. I would imagine this was a little bit of a leap of faith for you to launch this first Kickstarter, knowing that you weren't going to have Twitter and Instagram. You were probably a little bit nervous. You're probably very happy to see that it had no effect. Again, the second, what'd you say? The second most?
The first one being Kickstarter itself. The second source was my Patreon for Drive. And the third source of all my backers on this Kickstarter were from Bluesky. So yes.
But this was your most successful Sheldon Kickstarter, or your second most successful?
Financially, the most successful Kickstarter for Sheldon.
That's the headline. With no Twitter, no Facebook, no Instagram, your most successful Sheldon and by the way, just ballpark it. There's been half a dozen Sheldon Kickstarters, a dozen.
I think we've had
that's a high number.
No, a dozen. I think at this point.
It's a high number. It's not a small number. To be the best out of all of those, it's a big number.
It's a big number. Yeah. And so the main core reason why I wanted to share this was actually to communicate this, because I, like you, was afraid to leave Twitter. I was afraid to leave Instagram. I am not a superhuman. I don't think that every decision I make is the right one. And I was afraid that I might be making the wrong decision by leaving Twitter and Instagram. And I really want to underline this, especially as Musk and Zuckerberg proved to be such horrible human beings.
Yes.
You can leave and your career will be fine.
Yes.
If anything, this was the best Kickstarter I've ever had for Sheldon. And I did not use Twitter at all. I did not use Instagram at all. I didn't use Facebook at all.
Yeah.
So that's the top line. So let's go through faster now the rest of the sources, because it's just sort of fun to talk about. Fourth highest source, Patreon Sheldon, brought in 5% of backers.
Nice.
Fifth highest source, my website blog on Sheldon, brought in 5% of backers.
Another 5%.
The next source, MailChimp, my mailing list, basically brought in 4% of backers. My personal Kickstarter updates to my past Kickstarter of Anatomy of Dinosaurs.
Right.
That one alone brought in 3% of my backers for this one. Oddly enough, Brad, the Patreon for ComicLab brought in 3% of my backers for this.
Good job, comics
shout
community.
out and a thank you to all of our Patreon listeners over on ComicLab there.
Yeah.
And then there's a weird one, direct traffic, no refer info, which I find that hard to believe, frankly. I think that's just people that either had untraceable ways of using the internet.
Yep.
Because how would you have found it if there was no direct link to something? There's no way to. I guess you could have been on Kickstarter itself and just searching for things, but I think those are trackable and traceable.
Those are tracked. I know there's a statistic for that. Yeah, those are tracked.
And then the final one of my top 10 was an email newsletter that Kickstarter puts out itself. This is separate from saying, hey, specifically, you should go check out Dave. They put out a newsletter that goes out saying, hey, these are interesting projects we like.
Oh.
And that one brought in 3%.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've done the top 10 individual sources,
yeah,
let's just do some combined sources so you get a sense of it.
Right.
From all three of my Patreon accounts, Sheldon Drive and ComicLab, that constituted 16% of my final backers for this Kickstarter.
Yeah.
For my combined mailing list, that was 4%, as we talked about. There's only one that I have. But when Substack kicks in, that'll probably be a different way of formulating that. From my combined past Kickstarters, these are Kickstarters that I have run in the past and then went out and said, hey, if you liked me in the past, you might like this one. That was 12%. But the highest percentage of any combined grouping was all the Kickstarter sources. Their newsletters, their mailing lists, their promos in the projects we love, their promos on the comic subsection. That accounted for 36% of my backers. Again, just reinforcing that Kickstarter is kind of a must-use for cartoonists.
Yes. Every now and again, we'll get a question to the show saying, would you consider using this other platform? Would you consider doing this? Would you consider this? And the answer is no. You can't. You really can't with a straight face, especially if you're like Dave and I, and you've been spending a certain amount of time on Kickstarter building that network that you're going to rely on for your next Kickstarter. Like so many of these pledges came from people that pledged to Dave in different things, sometimes unrelated in the past. And he had a direct conduit to those people. That's what Kickstarter has built. Fair and square. They did that. They built that. To jettison that, it would take an awful lot, because it would feel to me that Twitter felt like a danger and never was. This you can see in black and white in solid numbers that you'd be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yes. I will 100% co-sign what Brad just said. What would have to happen is the utility of Kickstarter would basically have to disappear. They would have to shit the bed at this point. In a way like Twitter and Facebook have and Instagram has. So now let's talk about the most specific one that we want to talk about for Brad Guigar.
Yes.
So if you remember, I mentioned obliquely that I could set up a unique code for Brad to share on Brad's platforms with the caveat that anytime he brought somebody in, I would buy him a scotch at the NCS meeting in Boston this year.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell everybody that I owe Brad a lot of scotches now. And some of you SOBs canceled your pledge and then used Brad's code.
Oh, did they somebody said they were going to do that on Bluesky. They actually did that?
I think two or
that's
three people
tremendous.
did that. And I was like, I see you. I see what you're doing. And so I want to tell you, Brad, do you want to take a guess at what the final count was for Brad Guigar? Brad Guigar just by himself.
I know that I had cleared 10, so I'm going to guess maybe I probably hit an even dozen by the end, probably 12 backers.
Even better, Brad. You earned yourself 14 glasses of scotch because you brought in 14 people who themselves brought in $1,118 to the Kickstarter, Brad.
That's really good.
Just my friend Brad Guigar bringing that in.
I love hearing that.
And so anyway, so now that you've seen all the sources, and the big headline for me, again, is that Bluesky works. That's the big one that I really want to drive home. I wanted to give you specific numbers so that you felt good about leaving Twitter and Instagram and just using Bluesky. Because the numbers that you're being shown, like I've got 500 followers, I've got 5,000 followers, I've got 15,000 followers. Unless you can actualize those people into financially supporting you, they're kind of fake numbers from Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, right? They don't help you in your career path.
And it's taking time away from you that you need.
Yes.
It's taking students.
Yes.
Dave had all kinds. I know just myself. I've gained a lot of time not posting on several social media sites.
And not for nothing, it's not a perfect platform, but my mental health is better on Bluesky than it was in the last couple of years of Twitter.
I will tell you this. I didn't notice it quite. So people are like, oh, yeah, there's this and there's that on Twitter. So for Spice Rack Comics, that other project that I'm doing,
yes,
they wanted to open up a Twitter for that because a few of the members were like, well, there's still something there. And it was no skin off my nose. It's like, all right, I can do that. And so every now and again, I'm on Twitter just to navigate and see what's going on. And I don't realize that I'm on Twitter. And all of a sudden, I'll just look at some of the stuff going through the feed. And it is drastic how different, it particularly politically, it's coming from a completely different spectrum. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, my God, what are these stories? What's going on here? and a lot more negative. Like, it hit me in the face having been gone from Twitter for a while. Coming back, it's like, this is terrible. And then I realized, oh, I'm on Twitter. And then boop, I shut that tab down, went back to Bluesky, and it is literally a night and day difference in terms of the content that you're able to aggregate for yourself.
Yeah. And listen, I'm not opposed to news. I personally subscribe to 1, 2, 3, 4. I subscribe to 4 news sources where I'm paying for it. So I read a lot of news.
Oh, that's impressive. Yeah.
But I'm only saying that because on Bluesky itself, I mute a lot of stuff because I want Bluesky to be my happy place. Because we all need that. We need a place where we'll be like, I don't want to think about X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. And so and that has proved to be a very wise move for me on Bluesky. Because when I open that app, it's a breath. You know what I mean? I can take a little breath and I don't have to tense up and try to fix the world's problems in the back of my head. So now let's talk about, now that we've talked about what the sources of the income were for this Kickstarter, and now that we've talked about what a great friend Brad is and what a drunk friend Brad is going to be in Boston, let's talk about the gross profit, the net profit, and the long-term profit of this book, because a lot of people don't share brass tacks numbers, and I think it might be helpful for folks to hear this.
Yeah.
So the gross profit of this Kickstarter was $53,422. $53,400 basically. And so the costs for this book, printing and shipping this book, which will include the reprint of another anatomy book at a very small quantity, but I just want to be able to have the 4-pack.
Yeah.
So I basically underwrote it using this Kickstarter. So it's a little more expensive than normal, but $53,000 Kickstarter. My printing and shipping costs will be $11,400 to print and ship the book to the studio here, right? My mailing costs to fulfill these Kickstarter pledges to people all over the world is $7,800. The fees that Kickstarter charges me and that the credit card processor charges me will be $4,800. So my total costs will be $24,000, almost exactly, actually. And so my gross profit, $53,000, less the total cost of $24,000, will leave me with a net profit of $29,000. God, I keep saying this, $29,422, right? Yeah. Good, not great, but good for the year. That's a healthy chunk for the overall income of the studio. But here's where things truly pay off. I'm not just printing, Brad, the number of books that I need to fulfill this Kickstarter. As Brad has said, as I have said in the past, you use a Kickstarter to underwrite a larger print run that you will continue to sell on your store, at Comic-Cons, at book signings, at events, all sorts of things, right? So the additional sales of the copies of this book produced in this Kickstarter over the next 3 to 5 years, because on average, it takes me, I would say on average, 4 years to get rid of a book now that I'm pretty good at forecasting how many to print. Yeah. Sometimes I sell out of a book in 2 or 3 years, like I did with Anatomy of Animals. Sometimes it takes 5 years, 6 years, but on average, it's about 4 years. So over the next 4 years, I will make an additional profit on the book, and this is all free and clear, of $40,250. Jeez Louise, I can't read numbers today. So that gives me a final net profit amortized over the course of 3 or 5 years of $69,672 from this Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So now, the key thing there is that it's amortized. It's over the course of 3 to 5 years. I can't make a living off just this book. Right. But look at what I do on a year-to-year basis for my career. I also have, as I said, 2.5 other Patreons one for Drive, one for Sheldon, one for half with ComicLab. I also do in-person events, only one now mainly, but it's Comic-Con. That's always a big event. I have my store going, and every year, for the most part, I try to produce 1 to 2 new books. Yeah. Why? Because the amortized sales from a previously Kickstarter book are about $10,000 a year. So if you have 4 or 5 or 6 books in your store working for you, that adds up over the course of the year, right? And so that's how, in part, how I make my living is that I have the Patreons going. I have a new 1 to 2 new Kickstarters every year, and I have ongoing Shopify sales, ongoing Comic-Con sales, and then smaller things that we've talked about, like original art sales, this and that, eBays. But you get where this is going from. This is one piece of a larger puzzle that is my career. Yeah. So this Kickstarter is not make or break. It is one piece that will continue to pay for my career over the next 3 to 5 years.
And then plays a big part throughout your career, because like the first thing you said was like a huge amount of your Patreon, a huge amount of your Kickstarter backers were people that had been Kickstarter backers in the past. Yes. Right. And so every Kickstarter you do fuels the next Kickstarter that you do, gives you more people you can reach out to. But also keep in mind that you've got a storage space full of the books from those past Kickstarters. Yes. So what happens next is you can add those in your reward tiers in different ways. You can have those as add-ons. You have those in your store. Yes. So when people come up and they pledge to the Anatomy of Dogs, you've got those 3 previous anatomy books and somebody wants all 4 of them. Boom, that turns into a triple-digit sale at that point, right? So every one of those books that you're kickstarting is helping in a number of different ways, not just their direct sales, but in how they help the next Kickstarter and how they help the next sale. Everything builds on itself and is specifically built to build on itself. This is not a mistake. This is not a happy accident. This is exactly how Dave built this. There's no surprise that there are 4 anatomy books. That wasn't just something that happened. No. That's something that Dave, when he did his first one, I guarantee you, he had those other ones in mind. If this one goes well, then we go and we start building. All of this was something that was conceived in advance. And if you know how Kickstarter works, if you understand these concepts that Dave just shared with you, you can make them work for yourself too. Absolutely. And to give you an illustration of that, let's just grab like a sample pledge out of Anatomy of Dogs. So someone pledged for Anatomy of Dogs. It was a $35 pledge, right, for the book. And in the add-on section, they then proceeded to add on all 4 Drive hardcovers. Which is $220. So you tell me what the logic of that add-on is, like why you wouldn't expect, but with those add-ons, with those tiers that give you extras, you will get a bunch of people that will jump in and be like, oh, you know what? I missed that last Kickstarter. I was living in France, or, I was, I had no money. I was in grad school. Yes. And they will jump in on past Kickstarters via the current Kickstarter to get those books that they missed, right? Yeah. And that's the way to do it. And that's why I'm really kind of happy that you're willing to share actual numbers from your Kickstarter, because I don't think people get that nearly enough. There's a lot of mystique around building that, and to hear all of that wiped away with somebody willing to share their actual numbers and where everything's going, I think that's really super, super useful. And you know what? I missed one of the big ones, by the way. I actually forgot to include taxes in that. So I'm looking at my numbers right now and I realize I forgot to include tax. So that's another one. Yeah. So it would be a slightly lower, not a slightly lower, a good chunk lower final amortized net profit over the course of 3 to 5 years, because that first year would have You're gonna probably save about 30% if I'm guessing right from that profit that you're going to want to set aside for taxes. Yep. So anyway, all of which to say is the Kickstarter number that you see that's top line is never what the cartoonist is going to get, right? There's a lot of fees, there's a lot of taxes, there's a lot of shipping prices, there's a lot of production prices. So there's that. And then also that this is not a one and done prospect of like, well, my Kickstarter's over, I never think about it again. Yeah. You continue to sell
the books produced from that Kickstarter for the next 3 to 5 years as amortized sales in an overall ecosystem of books supporting books and Kickstarter supporting Kickstarters. So it's a much larger play.
And as we're wrapping this topic up, one thing to keep in mind is that the stretch goals. These stretch goals were not something that Dave made up as he went along or got excited and said, oh, this Kickstarter is going really well. I need more stretch goals. I need this. I need that. All of those goals, all of the economics was thought out in the first step. Right. And I've seen so many people get into trouble on Kickstarters because it starts to go better than they thought it would. And then they start throwing stretch goals on.
Everyone gets a free chicken, a free live chicken. I'll mail that to you, you know.
And since they hadn't considered the cost of that and what that's going to do to the final total, they end up in trouble on a successful Kickstarter, something that should have been successful because they threw in a bunch of costs that they hadn't accounted for in the very beginning.
Right.
So everything that Dave's talking about here, all these stretch goals, all this other stuff, all of those costs were factored in the first step. They were part of that first opening calculus that gave Dave his goal that he launched with. It wasn't stuff that came up as he went along. No. It was stuff that was there. I know the temptation is great when you're doing a Kickstarter to oh my gosh, I need more stretch goals. But that's the kind of thing that's best to be left for the second Kickstarter you do or the third one. You know, don't throw extra costs at yourself in the midst of a successful Kickstarter. That always ends in tears.
Yes. I can't emphasize that enough that Beth and I were planning this Kickstarter in some respects 6 months and more broadly speaking, 12 months out from when it started.
Yeah.
And a big part of our decision making in what kind of rewards to offer, what kind of add-ons to offer, what kind of stretch goals to offer were how affordable is this for the studio? Like how much does it add to a shipping cost to ship a pin versus something that can be flat packed?
Yes.
Or how much does it cost to add a free book for everybody versus a free, blabbity blue? Doesn't matter. Like there's quid pro quos to all the things that you could add or detract from your Kickstarter. So you have to plan it out. You have to think about it ahead of time, what your stretch goals are going to be. It has to be planned out. And then one other last topic that I want to talk about, Brad, is as you do Kickstarters, we've talked about how your past Kickstarters can impact your future Kickstarters because those backers are now reachable. You sort of have them on a mailing list now, basically, once they've backed you on Kickstarter. But here is another incredibly important factor that you have to keep in mind when you do a Kickstarter, is that you cannot cheapen out on the production of your materials, of your books, of your pins, of your stickers, of your tchotchkes, of your flyers, of whatever it's going to be, because sure, that might make you a little more money on this Kickstarter, but if you cheap out on this Kickstarter, you will pay the price on your next Kickstarter because people will go, "Oh, that Dave Kellett produces crap books. I don't want to back him again."
Yeah.
I will say when people get a book from me, it's a tremendous source of pride that they get a good book. They get a book as good as they could find in any Barnes & Noble on the quality shelves of what they are. I mean, like Anatomy of Dogs had a cloth wrapped spine, gold foil on the spine. It had a spot UV. It had a built-in ribbon bookmark. It had end papers. That stuff is expensive. It adds cost, but you get a beautiful physical book. And honestly, the market that we're going into as independent cartoonists is people don't want a mass market looking book. They want a special book because they are backing an independent cartoonist. So what I'm getting at there is you can't cheapen out on the things that you source for your Kickstarter. It has to be a good quality or else you'll pay the price on the next Kickstarter.
Yeah. You'll have a smaller bill to pay this time, but you're not going to have those customers to reach next time.
Yes.
You're going to lose them.
You're stealing from future Brad or future Dave if you do that.
And the thing to really look out for there is print on demand. Anything where you just register on a website and upload a PDF and then print one copy of a book, if that's the format that you've got set up for yourself, those books are rarely, if ever, quality controlled. They're rarely, if ever, good quality books to begin with. If that's what you've got to really, really look out for that.
And I will put one hat on top of a hat to close this conversation out and close this show out, which is to say, Brad has put together collections of us talking about Kickstarter on Patreon. So if you are a Patreon backer, Go search for the Kickstarter collections that Brad has specifically put together. And if you're not a backer on Kickstarter or on Patreon, but just want to get those Kickstarter-focused episodes, you can get them specifically as a collection from Brad.
Absolutely. Now, one last thing before we let everybody go. As soon as you're done with listening to this podcast, we've got a new episode of Wrong Way for you. If I've got my calendar correct, we just posted a new episode of Wrong Way with Dave, Kevin McShane, and myself. We've already had an episode where we drew SpongeBob the wrong way. We've drawn Sonic the Hedgehog the wrong way, and we've drawn Garfield the wrong way. And you're not going to believe who we've got lined up for you next. It's a great show. You're going to love it.
I love it. I love this project so much. It is so fun hanging out and laughing with my friends and drawing ridiculous versions of IP characters that you love. And so please go check it over at youtube.com/@wrongwayshow.com. So youtube.com/@wrongwayshow.
And
or you just go to, I'm sorry, I cut you off, Brad.
Yeah, you can go to wrongwayshow.com, or I'll have a link in.
That's an easier URL.
Yeah, that'll go to Patreon, but the first one we release is a public cut anyway. So you can look at it right there on Patreon. And of course, I'll have a link in the show notes for you to make it super easy for you. Here's something else that you might see if you go to the show notes and read deep enough. You might see that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my ever-delightful friend, Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com, and the co-host of the new drawing show at wrongwayshow.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com, and another co-host of the drawing show at wrongwayshow.com.
And you know what? I'm realizing I didn't say it, so I just want to say a huge thank you to all the ComicLab listeners that did jump in over at the dogkickstarter.com there. I really do appreciate it. The book is going to come out gorgeous. I'm super proud of it. I really love it. I think it's one of the best books I've ever made. And I thank you for spreading the word, and I thank you for backing the project. And I will say the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Labs, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are burning up the podcast chart.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Brad is so sonorous.
Wonderful.
Would you ever do an autobio comic again, Brad?
I would do Fables again if it was feasible. Like, I enjoyed Fables. An autobio comic, no. I would not do a true autobio comic. No, I would not do that.
Why? Now, can I ask you why?
Honestly, I would be. It's my own secretive nature.
Yeah.
You know, it's like most of the stuff that I think my attitude is it's none of your business, you know? So that goes to what I think about a lot of things. It also goes to my actual life. Also, just the long list of problems on an autobio comic, because no one leads a solitary life. Now, all of a sudden, my wife is inextricably tied to an autobio comic. My kids are, their relationships. I don't think so. Fables I would do again in a heartbeat if it was ever feasible to do something like that. But I would never do a true autobio. How about you?
No, I don't think I would. I like you. I am secretive. My life is for me. My comics are for everybody, but my life is for me, I think. And then also, and I think that's also the mentally safer way to go on your heart and on your mental game, is like you need to hold things for yourself, by yourself, to yourself. But then also, I'll just do the secret reveal and pull back the curtain and say, my life is boring. I'm a creature of habits, and they are boring habits. And for the most day in, day out stuff, I am boring, you know?
Yeah. Was I supposed to hop in there and tell you that you're not? I'm sorry, I missed that cue.